She showed up to the most elite sniper competition in the country, carrying a rifle older than half the men on the range. No scope, no rangefinder, no computer assist. Just iron sights, a worn leather case, and a last name that meant nothing to anyone there. They laughed. Of course they did. Lieutenant Ethan Voss, three-time range champion, looked at her equipment and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Did she bring that from a museum?" What happened next silenced every man on that range, and it started a war she didn't know she'd already been drafted into. If you're new here, subscribe now. Hit the bell. Drop your city in the comments so I can see how far this story travels. You will not want to miss where this one goes. The drive from Las Vegas to Redstone Tactical Range took 2 hours and 40 minutes on a good day. On a morning when the desert wind was already throwing dust sideways across Highway 95, it took closer to 3. Maya Callahan made it in 2 hours and 15. She didn't speed deliberately. She just drove the way she did most things. Focused, efficient, with no tolerance for wasted motion. The old Jeep Wrangler she'd borrowed from her cousin rattled on the cracked asphalt, the passenger seat occupied by a rifle case that had seen more desert sun than she had. The case was scratched along one edge, the zipper replaced twice, the interior foam compressed from years of use. It had belonged to her father before her, and his father before him, and Maya had never once considered upgrading it. Some things weren't meant to be replaced. She arrived at 0537. Check-in wasn't until 0700, but she'd learned a long time ago that early was the only punctual, and punctual was already late. The Redstone Tactical Range occupied a stretch of Nevada desert that the military had quietly leased from the Bureau of Land Management nearly 30 years ago. It wasn't on any civilian map. The entrance was marked by a single rusted sign reading, "Restricted, authorized personnel only," half buried in blown sand. And if you missed the turn, a narrow gravel road barely distinguishable from the surrounding scrub, you'd drive another 11 miles before the GPS admitted it had no idea where you were. Maya didn't miss the turn. She'd been here once before, 8 years ago, as a junior attaché to a senior marksmanship instructor, carrying gear bags and keeping quiet while men twice her rank argued about ballistic coefficients. Nobody had spoken to her then, except to ask for water and hand back an empty canteen. She remembered everything about the place anyway. The parking area was already half occupied when she pulled in, government plates mostly. 2 unmarked black Suburbans that practically announced themselves as federal. A row of desert tan vehicles with unit stickers Maya recognized. SEAL Team 7 out of Coronado, 1st SFODD from Bragg, a Marine Scout sniper contingent from Pendleton. These were not recreational shooters. These were the people who redefined what was possible with a rifle. She sat in the Jeep for a moment after cutting the engine. Her hands were steady. Her breathing was normal. The coffee she'd had in Tonopah 4 hours ago had worn off, and she hadn't replaced it, which meant she was running on sleep and purpose. She picked up the rifle case from the passenger seat and got out. The check-in pavilion was a corrugated steel structure that trapped heat like a convection oven in summer, and apparently did nothing to stop cold desert wind in October. A PFC who looked about 19 sat behind a folding table with a clipboard and the expression of someone who had made peace with his station in life. "Name?" he said without looking up. "Callahan, Maya, Captain, Army Reserve." The PFC ran his finger down the list, stopped, ran it again. "Callahan, Maya, Captain." He looked up. Something shifted in his face. "You're in lane 12. Thank you. You'll need to check in your weapon with the armorer for inspection. Standard protocol." "I know." She carried her rifle case to the armorer's station, a secondary table where a master sergeant with calloused hands and reading glasses perched on the end of his nose inspected each weapon before marking it cleared. He'd done this enough times that his movements were automatic. Open the case, check the action, check the bore, verify the model against the registration paperwork, sign the form. He opened Maya's case. The automatic stopped. He looked at the rifle, then at her, then at the rifle again. "This is a Remington 700, he said carefully. 1984 production model. Correct. With iron sights. Correct. No rail system, no mounts, no..." He turned the rifle slowly. "No optics whatsoever." "That's right. Captain." He lowered his glasses and looked at her directly. The minimum engagement distance today is 400 meters. There are targets out to 1,200. I'm aware of the range card. A pause stretched between them. He was a professional, so he didn't say what was on his face. He signed the form instead, handed the rifle back, and watched her walk toward the staging area. She heard him mutter something to the assistant armorer behind her. She didn't catch the words, but she knew the shape of them. The staging area held 26 shooters. 25 of them had rifles that cost more than most cars. The hardware on display was legitimately impressive. Schmidt and Bender scopes, Nightforce glass, AICS chassis systems, suppressors, bipods with micro-adjust elevation, ballistic computers integrated into scope mounts that sync to handheld weather meters. One shooter from the SEAL contingent had a setup that Maya estimated at somewhere north of $18,000. He noticed her looking. "Tremor 5, he said, with the casual pride of someone who expected admiration. "Rings to 4,000 meters with the right load." "Nice," Maya said. He looked at her rifle case. "What are you running?" "Remington." "Yeah, which chassis?" "Original?" "Original what?" "The original chassis. Factory stock, 1984. The shooter, his name tape read Kowalski, stared at her. "You're joking." "No." "At Redstone? Against this field?" "I was invited," Maya said, which was true, and which was all that needed to be said. Kowalski turned to the man beside him, a thick-necked ranger with a DCF suppressor on a chassis that probably cost $6,000, and they exchanged a look that contained an entire conversation. Maya set her case down and opened it. She began her function check with the same sequence she'd done since she was 14 years old in her father's garage. Work the bolt, check the extractor tension, ensure the trigger broke clean, verify the barrel crown. She did this without thinking about it, the same way her hands knew how to find her keys in the dark. She was on her third cycle when she heard the voice. "Captain Callahan." She looked up. Lieutenant Ethan Voss was not a small man, 6'2", built like someone who made the gym a religious obligation, with a face that had the particular confidence of someone who had never been genuinely beaten at anything. He wore the insignia of naval special warfare, and he moved through the staging area like it was his living room, which, in terms of Redstone's history, it mostly was. 3 consecutive wins at the Inter-Service Precision Marksmanship competition. The standing record at 500 meters in a crosswind. His name on a plaque that hung inside the range office behind the check-in table. He looked at her rifle like it was a punchline. "I heard we had a civilian entrant," he said. "Reserve," Maya said. "Army Reserve." "Right." His smile didn't waver. "With a museum piece." "I'm comfortable with it." "I'm sure you are." He glanced at Kowalski, who was watching with the satisfied expression of someone watching a scene unfold exactly as predicted. "Can I ask, and I'm genuinely curious, what's your plan at 1,200 meters with iron sights?" "Shoot accurately," Maya said. A beat of silence. Then Voss laughed. Not meanly, not cruelly, the way some men did, but with a kind of genuine amusement that was almost worse. It said, "I don't even need to be threatened by this." "Fair enough," he said, and walked away. The range briefing was conducted by Major Douglas Farwell, a lean man with sharp eyes and a habit of pausing 3 beats too long before each sentence, as though giving each word time to settle. He ran through the qualification format, a 12-stage engagement sequence running from 400 to 1,200 meters, with each stage scored on hit, miss, and time to first round effect, with bonus points for rapid follow-up shots and penalties for position errors. Maya listened and took no notes. She had memorized the format when she received her invitation 3 weeks ago. She'd also taken note of something else in the briefing package, something Farwell mentioned only briefly, buried in the logistics section. Shooters were assigned pre-staged equipment at their designated lanes. Scopes, where applicable, were mounted and zeroed to standard by the range armorer the previous afternoon. She hadn't been told this when she was issued her lane assignment, and she hadn't requested it, which meant someone had arranged it. She thought about that on the walk to Lane 12. Lane 12 was at the far left end of the firing line, the disadvantaged position on most ranges because you caught the prevailing wind at an angle that the other lanes partially avoided. The shooting mat was clean, the sandbags properly positioned, and at the front of the lane there was a small plastic tray containing a basic bipod and a Night Force ATAXIR scope in a quick detach mount. Maya looked at it. She hadn't requested equipment. She hadn't filed for any supplemental gear. Her registration clearly stated she was using personal equipment, her father's rifle, no optics. She picked up the scope. It was a quality piece of glass, used but looked after. And something about the elevation turret felt slightly wrong when she turned it. The friction was off, the tactile clicks less distinct than they should have been, like the internals had been interfered with. She brought it up and looked through the optic at a distant berm marker. She rotated the magnification ring, watched the image, let her eye settle. The glass was off. Subtly, but unmistakably. A calibration deviation that would place rounds consistently to the right of where the crosshairs indicated. Not enough to notice without careful inspection, not enough to diagnose mid-stage without the right instruments, but enough to throw shots at distance. Someone had deliberately miscalibrated it. She set it back in the tray very carefully, the same way you might put something sharp back on a table. Then she removed her rifle from the case, mounted the bipod, and lay down on the mat. She didn't use the scope. The qualification sequence began at 0730 with a tone from the range control speaker and Major Farwell's voice cutting through the static. All shooters, this is a live fire exercise. Range is hot. Commence when target appears at your lane. 26 shooters settled behind their glass. Maya's rifle had no glass to settle behind. She adjusted her eye relief to the rear aperture sight. She had been shooting this rifle with these sights since she was 19. The rear aperture was worn from use, the front post blade sharp and familiar. She knew their relationship the way a musician knows the keys of their instrument, not intellectually, but physically, in the muscles of her eye and the nerve endings of her trigger finger. 400 meters. The wind at her face, east-northeast, approximately 8 to 10 miles per hour, gusting fractionally. She'd read the range flags on the walkout and the mirage pattern off the berm as she settled. Her data was rough by the standards of everyone else on the line, but it was hers, and she trusted it. The target appeared, a standard E-type silhouette at 400 meters. She exhaled. The world quieted in the way it always did at this moment. A compression of attention so complete that everything outside the front sight blade ceased to exist. The sound of the wind became information rather than interference. The weight of the rifle, the temperature of the stock against her cheek, the slight resistance of the trigger, all of it organized itself into a single point of decision. She pressed. The rifle moved. She stayed with it. The silhouette dropped. On her left, Kowalski's shot was still tracking downrange. On her right, another shooter was still managing his breathing. Maya worked the bolt smoothly. Ejected brass spun into the dirt. "Hit," said the range control spotter over the lane speaker. The second stage appeared at 600 meters. Different position. A partial silhouette exposed around a berm prop. She read the angle. Adjusted her rear aperture a quarter turn. Adjusted her hold for wind. Pressed. Hit. Third stage. 750 meters. Moving target. Lateral traverse, slow, about 3 feet per second. She tracked. Estimated the time of flight. Added lead. Pressed at the apex of her hold. Hit. The range went quiet in a different way then. Not the focused quiet of shooters in concentration, but something else. The specific silence that falls over a group of people when the thing they expected to fail doesn't. She was aware of it. She kept shooting. By stage 7, 900 meters, 2-target engagement in sequence, she became conscious that shooters in adjacent lanes were pausing between their own shots to watch her. Kowalski had stopped shooting altogether on his second target. She heard his spotter say quietly, "You want to focus on your own lane, sir?" Kowalski didn't answer. She pressed the second shot, rolled her breathing, came back to the front sight. Hit, hit, at 900 meters, with iron sights, in a crosswind. The lane speaker crackled. She thought for a moment it was Farwell, but the voice was different, lower, deliberate, the kind of voice that came from years of talking on a radio in places where talking loudly got people killed. Lane 12, this is range control. Please hold after completing stage 8 for administrative review. She kept her position. Finished stage 8, a 1,000-meter shot, single target, stationary, and then lay still, hand away from the trigger, muzzle safely downrange. Hit. She waited. Chief Marcus Hale had not been scheduled to be at Redstone that week. He'd been pulled in 24 hours earlier as a last-minute addition to the Range Safety Oversight Committee, a role he'd been told was routine, a favor to Farwell, who was short a qualified range officer. He was 51, built like a man who had once been a very large athlete and had redistributed the weight over decades, with hands that knew the difference between a safe weapon and an unsafe one at a touch. He'd been watching Maya from the observation post since stage 3. Not because he expected her to fail, because he didn't. He'd read the registration packet when it crossed his desk. The routine review of all entrants, their service records, their qualification history. Most of it was the kind of document that said everything and told you nothing. But Callahan's record had a specific texture, places she'd been, courses she'd completed, a marksmanship certification from Fort Benning that predated most of the shooters on this range by 6 years, under an instructor whose name Hale recognized because the man had once been the best sniper in the 75th Ranger Regiment. He'd taken note. He was still taking note when the range safety sergeant appeared at his elbow. "Chief, administrative hold on lane 12. "I know, I ordered it." "Sir?" Hale lowered his binoculars. "I want to see the equipment manifest for that lane. What was staged there last night? Who staged it? And whether any of it was on her original registration." The sergeant's expression shifted. "Sir, if it's a problem, I'll sign the request myself." Hale looked at him. "Go." Maya was sitting upright on her mat, rifle across her knees, when the range safety sergeant arrived at her lane. He handed her a sheet, an administrative review form citing equipment verification as the cause of the hold. She read it, said nothing. The sergeant looked at the plastic tray with the scope in it. "Ma'am, did you use this optic during the qualification sequence?" "No." "Are you aware it was placed at your lane?" "Yes." "Did you request it?" "No." He made a note. "Can you tell me why you didn't use it?" Maya picked up the scope, turned the elevation turret, held it out so the sergeant could feel the slack in the click mechanism. He felt it. His face changed. "Someone miscalibrated this," she said. "The deviation would run shots right at distance. I'd estimate 6 to 8 inches at 1,000 meters. Enough to make every shot look like shooter error." The sergeant stared at her for a moment. He was a professional, so he kept his expression controlled. But she saw the thing move behind his eyes. The recognition that what she was describing was not an accident. "I'll need to take this for technical inspection," he said. "Take it," Maya said. He picked up the scope, started to leave. "Sergeant," she said. He turned. "There's one more thing." She reached into her kit bag and removed a small plastic evidence bag, the kind that any experienced fieldcraft person keeps in their gear because the field had a way of producing things that needed to be preserved. Inside the bag was an ejected casing from stage 5. She'd pocketed it deliberately after noticing the primer. "This is from stage 5, she said. "Check the lot number against the ammunition issued to lane 12. I think you'll find a discrepancy." He took the bag. She watched him walk away and did not relax her shoulders, because there was nothing to relax about yet. 30 minutes later, when the hold was still in effect, and the other shooters were milling around the staging area in various states of impatience and curiosity, Lieutenant Voss materialized beside her lane. He wasn't laughing now. "Administrative hold," he said. "On your lane, opening qualification day." "That's right," Maya said. "What happened?" She looked at him. "Equipment issue." "What kind of equipment issue?" "The kind someone else created." Voss was quiet for a moment. He was smart enough to hear what she wasn't saying. She watched him process it, the scope, the lane staging, the hold, and she watched him decide something. "You're accusing someone of sabotage," he said. "I'm describing what I found," Maya said. "Other people can decide what to call it." Another pause. The wind moved across the range. Somewhere downfield, a berm flag snapped. "You hit 9 out of 9, Voss said. "Without glass, at 1,000 meters. 8 of 9, she said. "Stage 6, I was off by an inch. Gust I didn't fully read." He stared at her. 8, she said. He walked away without another word, and Maya watched him go, and she thought, "You're either going to be a problem or an asset, and I genuinely don't know which yet." The technical inspection of the Night Force scope took 45 minutes. The armorer, a different one from the morning check-in, this one older, with a methodical way of working that Maya respected, confirmed what she'd told the sergeant. The elevation turret's zero-click detent had been deliberately loosened, and the reticle had been mechanically shifted off the bore axis by inserting a thin shim behind the tube ring. It was sophisticated work, the kind of thing that left no visible trace and would survive a casual inspection. He also confirmed something else, which he reported to Chief Hale rather than to the range safety sergeant, because by then it was clear this was above the sergeant's authority level. The scope bore a serial number that matched the range's armory inventory. But according to the inventory log, that scope had not been checked out for any qualification event. It had been listed as under maintenance. Someone had taken it from the armory, modified it, and placed it in Maya's lane without any official record. Chief Hale stood in the armorer's station and looked at the scope for a long time. "Who has access to the armory after hours?" he asked. The armorer removed his glasses. "Officers above 04, the duty NCO, and anyone the duty NCO cleared." "Who was duty NCO last night?" A pause. "Staff Sergeant Pruitt, sir. He's Lane 8 safety officer today." Hale looked at the inventory log again, then at the scope. "Nobody touches Pruitt until I say so," he said quietly, "and I want eyes on him." Maya didn't know any of this yet. What she knew was that the hold had been lifted, a brief announcement from Farwell over the range speaker, terse and uninformative. The administrative review concluded pending further review, and the qualification sequence was resuming. She knew the scope was gone from her tray. She knew that 2 range officers she hadn't seen before the hold were now positioned near the staging area, and they were watching the lane assignments more carefully than range safety officers typically did. She knew that someone had gone to the trouble of acquiring a restricted scope from a secured armory, spending 20 minutes carefully sabotaging its zero, and placing it at her specific lane on the night before the qualification, which meant someone had known she was in lane 12 before the lane assignments were publicly posted. Lane assignments came from Farwell's office. She lay back down on her mat. Stage 9 waited downfield, 1,100 meters. She found the target through the rear aperture. The mirage was building now. Heat shimmer off the desert floor even in October, distorting the target's edges into a soft watercolor blur. She let it. Her brain had learned, over years, to read through mirage rather than fight it. She pressed. Hit. She worked the bolt. And beneath the clean mechanical sound of the action, beneath the wind and the distant crack of other shooters' rifles, she felt the shape of something she hadn't allowed herself to name yet. This wasn't hazing. Hazing was casual, opportunistic, the product of bored men with too much hierarchy and not enough to do. This was planned, which meant someone had looked at her name on the entry list and decided, before she ever arrived, that she needed to be stopped. Not embarrassed. Stopped. The question wasn't whether someone had tried to sabotage her. The question was why, and what they were willing to do next. Stage 10 appeared at 1,200 meters. She breathed. And somewhere in the range office behind her, a staff sergeant named Pruitt sent a text message he thought nobody would ever read. "She's still shooting. Scope plan didn't work. What do you want me to do?" He waited. The reply came in 40 seconds. "Find her kit bag." There's a secondary option. Pruitt's phone went back into his cargo pocket, and he spent exactly 4 seconds deciding whether to feel bad about it before deciding he didn't. He was a practical man. He had a practical arrangement with practical people who paid practically well. And whatever was happening with the woman in lane 12 was above his pay grade to understand and below his conscience to question. He'd been told the kit bag was a secondary option. He didn't ask what that meant. He walked. Maya's kit bag was a standard Molly-compatible pack, olive drab, unremarkable, sitting against the rear berm of lane 12 beside her shooting mat. She was downrange in position, working stage 11. Range protocols prohibited anyone from approaching an active shooting lane from the rear without visible safety, signaling from the active shooter, a rule that existed for obvious reasons and was violated constantly for administrative ones. Pruitt had a clipboard. A clipboard made everything look official. He was 15 feet from the bag when a hand came down on his shoulder from behind. Not grabbing, just landing there, present and deliberate, the way a very large man's hand communicates things without needing to apply pressure. Staff Sergeant Pruitt. Pruitt stopped. Chief Hale moved around to face him, which meant Pruitt was now standing between a 6'2" former operator and an active shooting lane, neither of which was a comfortable place to be. Hale had the kind of face that had stopped expressing surprise sometime in the previous decade. He looked at Pruitt the way a man looks at a card he's already seen and already knows the value of. "Where are you headed?" Hale asked. Pruitt lifted the clipboard. "Administrative check. Lane assignment verification. Lane 12. Yes, sir. During active fire. I have safety override authorization." "From who?" Pruitt opened his mouth and found it empty. Hale took the clipboard, read it, turned it over, handed it back. "That authorization is signed by Major Farwell. I just talked to Major Farwell. He didn't sign anything for Lane 12 today." He paused. "So let's try again. Where are you headed?" The range speaker crackled. "Hit," said the downrange spotter. "Stage 11, confirmed." Pruitt said nothing. His face had gone to a particular shade of controlled that was working hard and not quite getting there. Hale watched him work through the math, how much he could deny, how much was already documented, what the gap looked like between what he'd done and what could be proven. "You don't have to say anything right now," Hale said, "but I'm going to need you to step away from this lane. Walk to the range office. Sit down somewhere I can find you." He paused again. "And I'm going to need your phone." Pruitt stopped. "Your phone," Hale said, "or I call the range commander right now and we do this differently. Your choice. You've got about 4 seconds." Pruitt took his phone from his cargo pocket and handed it over. Maya didn't know any of that either. She was at stage 12, 1,200 meters. The maximum distance on the range card, the one that was supposed to be the great equalizer. The distance where wind drift compounded, where bullet drop required precise dope, where even small errors in reading conditions produced large errors on target. The distance that separated the exceptional from the merely good. She lay flat, elbows locked, rifle settled into the natural hollow of her shoulder the way it had settled 10,000 times. The rear aperture gave her a blade-width picture of the world at 1,200 meters. The target was a full silhouette, generous at this distance, though it didn't feel generous when the mirage was bending the target image, and the wind had picked up to what she estimated as 12, maybe 13 miles per hour from the east-northeast. She had no wind meter. She'd looked at the range flags and felt the wind on her neck and done the arithmetic in her head, the way her father had taught her before she was old enough to understand why it mattered. "The machine will fail," he'd told her, sitting in that cold garage with the disassembled rifle between them. "Battery dies. Screen freezes. Glass fogs up. Something always goes wrong when you need it most. You need to be the machine, Maya. Everything else is backup." She pressed. The rifle moved. She stayed with it through the recoil. A pause. Longer than the others, downrange spotters at 1,200 meters had a longer time of flight to track. Hit. She heard it distantly, the way you hear confirmation of something you already knew. She worked the bolt for the last time on the qualification sequence, ejected the final case, laid the rifle safe, and then she put her forehead down on the mat, just for a moment, and let the quiet fill her. 12 stages, 12 engagements, 400 to 1,200 meters. She didn't know her score yet. She didn't need to. She knew which shots were exactly where she'd held them and which one had drifted, and she had already begun the forensic analysis of why. The mirage read at stage 6, the fraction of a second she'd taken too long to settle her trigger pull. 8 of 9 through stage 9 had been a correction. Stage 12 was clean. She wasn't performing for anyone. She was working through the problems the way she always did, because that was the only way she knew how to exist at a rifle. She rose from the mat. Voss was standing at the end of the lane. He didn't say anything at first. He had his own rifle hanging from a sling, the qualification apparently complete, and he was looking at her with an expression she hadn't seen on his face before. Not admiration, not yet, maybe never, but something more honest than contempt. Recalculation. "What's your group size at 1,000?" he asked. "On a good day? About 3/4 MOA. With iron sights." "With iron sights." He was quiet for a beat. "That's not possible." "You watched me shoot." "I watched you hit." "That's not the same as knowing your group." He shifted his weight, the unconscious adjustment of a man who isn't comfortable standing still in an unsettled conversation. "Who trained you?" Maya picked up her rifle and began breaking it down for transport. "My father." "Who's your father?" "Thomas Callahan." Voss's face did something she hadn't expected. Not recognition, confusion. The particular confusion of someone searching a mental file and finding it empty. I don't know that name. No, Maya said. Most people don't. She worked in silence for a moment. The rifle broke down into its components with the ease of muscle memory, each piece finding its place in the worn foam of the case. The scope they put at your lane, Voss said. She looked up. I saw Pruitt this morning, he said, moving through the lanes before check-in. I thought he was doing safety prep. A pause. He went to lane 12 twice. Maya closed the rifle case. Did you tell anyone? I'm telling you. I mean anyone with authority to do something about it. He held her gaze. I'm finding Chief Hale now. She picked up her kit bag. Thank you, Lieutenant. He started to walk, then stopped. How'd you know the scope was bad? The elevation turret, she said. Wrong feel. Too much play in the click. I've handled enough Night Force glass to know what that mechanism is supposed to feel like. This one had been worked on. You caught that from feel? Yes. He looked at her for a moment longer. Then he nodded once. Not a gesture of approval exactly, but of revision, and walked toward the range office. Maya shouldered her kit bag and walked the opposite direction. The staging area had a different atmosphere when she returned than it had at 0700. It was quieter. Not the productive quiet of shooters in focus, but the uneasy quiet of a group of people who had witnessed something they hadn't prepared for and weren't sure how to categorize. The SEAL shooters had clustered at one end with their spotters, talking in the low voices of men who have a private opinion they haven't committed to publicly yet. The Marine contingent was cleaning weapons with the methodical patience of people who cleaned weapons to avoid having opinions. Kowalski was sitting on a case with his elbows on his knees, watching her approach with an expression that had evolved from the morning's version. He'd been open about his contempt earlier. Now he was just looking. She set her case down at her assigned spot and began going through her kit bag. A habitual inventory, everything in its place. Cleaning kit, spare parts, field notebook, ammunition box. She counted the rounds in the ammunition box. Then she counted them again. Then she set the box down and sat very still for a moment. She'd come to the range with 60 rounds. Standard load for the qualification format. 12 stages, maximum 5 rounds per stage, plus a carry buffer. She'd fired 22 rounds in qualification. She should have 38 remaining. She had 20. 18 rounds were missing, not spilled. The box showed no signs of disturbance and the dividers between rounds were intact. The ammunition had been removed deliberately, carefully, from a sealed container inside a kit bag she'd kept within 10 feet of herself all morning, except for one period of about 20 minutes, the administrative hold. When she'd been sitting on her mat, away from the staging area, the kit bag had been here. She looked around the staging area without appearing to, counted positions, identified faces, mapped who had been where during the hold period. She opened her field notebook and wrote 3 numbers, the lot number from the round she'd pulled during stage 5, which she'd already surrendered to the range safety sergeant, the count discrepancy, 18 rounds, and the time 091 scene, the midpoint of the administrative hold. She closed the notebook. A shadow fell across her kit bag. Captain Callahan. A voice she didn't recognize. She looked up. The man was in his mid-40s, wearing a range officer's vest over civilian clothes, with the particular kind of unremarkable face that took effort to assemble. Not memorable. Not distinctive. The face of someone who had, at some point, made a deliberate choice about being forgettable. He was holding a folder. I'm from the Competition Oversight Committee, he said. We need to discuss an irregularity in your qualification. What kind of irregularity? Your ammunition, he said. We've received a report that the lot number on your issued rounds doesn't match the competition standard lot. If that's confirmed, your qualification scores would be invalidated pending review. Maya looked at him. She looked at the folder. Who filed the report? She said. That's confidential during the review process. When was the report filed? This morning. Before or after qualification? He paused. Just briefly, the length of time it takes to locate a prepared answer. I don't have that information in front of me. If the report was filed before qualification, Maya said, then someone knew there was going to be an ammunition irregularity before the qualification began, which would mean they created it. The man's face didn't change. That was the tell. A genuine response would have involved some reaction, even a controlled one. This was a face that was managing itself. "I'd need you to surrender your remaining ammunition for lot verification," he said. "I'll surrender it to Chief Hale," Maya said. "In front of a witness, not to you. I'm authorized committee oversight. Show me your credential and I'll document it in writing, then we'll go find Chief Hale together." She pulled out her field notebook. "Your name?" A pause that lasted one beat too long. "Hayden," he said. "Richard Hayden." She wrote it down. "Rank?" "I'm a civilian contractor." "Which company?" Another beat. "I'm not at liberty to—" Then I'm not surrendering anything." She looked at him directly. "If you want my ammunition, get me Chief Hale and 2 range officers and a chain of custody form. Otherwise, we're done." Hayden looked at her for a moment, the unremarkable face doing something underneath that she couldn't fully read. Then he closed his folder and walked away. Maya watched him go and added 3 words to her notebook. "Find Richard Hayden." Chief Hale was in his range office when Maya found him, standing over a table where Pruitt's phone lay inside an evidence bag alongside the Night Force scope and a printed copy of what appeared to be the Armory access log. Sergeant Major Lena Ward was beside him. Maya hadn't been introduced, but she'd noted the name tape during the morning briefing and had placed her immediately. Lena Ward, 75th Rangers, marksmanship instructor, the kind of record that appeared in footnotes of training documents without explanation. Ward was looking at the phone log with the careful attention of someone who read evidence the way other people read maps. Hale looked up when Maya entered, took in her expression. "What happened?" She told him. Ammunition count. Richard Hayden. The folder. The credential that wasn't produced. Ward and Hale exchanged a look over the table. The economical communication of people who had worked together long enough to compress sentences into eye contact. "Hayden," Hale said. "Describe him." She did. Mid-40s, average height, unremarkable face, the deliberate kind. Hale turned to Ward. "That's not anyone on the committee list." "No," Ward said. "It's not." She picked up a printed roster. Committee has 7 members. 5 are accounted for at the observation post. 1 is with Major Farwell. 1 is— She paused, looked at the roster again. "Listed as arriving tomorrow." "None of them are Richard Hayden," Hale said. "No." Maya set her field notebook on the table. "There's another thing. The ammunition that's missing from my kit. 18 rounds. If someone has them and can alter the lot markings, they have material evidence they can use to support the claim that I brought non-standard ammunition." "You still have what's left?" Ward asked. "Yes. Give it to me. I'll get it into evidence custody right now with proper chain of documentation." Ward looked at her. "You did the right thing not surrendering it to him." Maya handed over the ammunition box. Ward put it in an evidence bag, sealed it, initialed the seal, and handed it to the range safety sergeant who had been standing in the corner with the practiced invisibility of someone doing exactly what he was told. "Get that to the armorer," Ward said. "Full lot verification, in writing. I want a signed report before end of day." "Yes, ma'am." He left. Maya looked at Hale. "Is Pruitt talking?" "Not yet." Hale's voice was even. "He's a practical man, which means he's doing the math on what's in his best interest. That math takes time." He paused. "What he gave us by not talking is almost as interesting as what he might say." "His phone," Maya said. "His phone," Hale confirmed. "The last text he sent, and the response. We can't read the content without authorization, but we can read the metadata. The response came from a number registered to a contractor account." He looked at her. "Not Richard Hayden." "What name?" Hale was quiet for a moment. "Something you need to understand first. The people who set this up, they're not doing it to humiliate you. This isn't hazing." "I know." "Do you know why?" Maya held his gaze. "Because they went to the trouble of accessing a secured armory the night before a major inter-service competition and spent 20 minutes sabotaging a scope. That's not someone trying to embarrass a woman at a shooting competition. That's someone trying to discredit a specific result before it happens." Ward had stopped what she was doing. She was watching Maya now. "They expected me to use the scope," Maya continued, "or they expected me to find it too late and use it anyway. Either way, my shots would have been off. They had the ammunition irregularity as a backup, to imply I'd brought wrong rounds and explain any anomalies. She paused. So the question isn't why they wanted me to fail. It's why they needed me to fail specifically. What result were they trying to prevent? Hale said nothing for a moment. The range outside was resuming. She could hear it, the distant percussion of rifles working through the afternoon stages. Your scores from this morning are going into the official record, he said finally. 12-stage qualification. I'm certifying them myself. I know. That matters to someone, he said. Enough to do all of this. My father's name, Maya said quietly. Is that what this is about? Hale looked at her for a long time, long enough that the silence became its own kind of answer. Thomas Callahan, he said. You mentioned him to Voss. You were listening. Range is small. A pause. Your father was at Redstone years ago. Different context. He stopped. How much do you know about what he did here? He never talked about it, Maya said. He told me about the shooting, the technical side. He taught me everything I know about reading wind and mirage and trigger pull. But he never talked about what happened here specifically. She paused. Just that it hadn't gone the way it was supposed to. Hale nodded slowly. Something behind his eyes had settled into a particular gravity. There's a file, he said. It's been sealed for 22 years. It shouldn't be sealed, but it is. He was quiet for a moment. I've been trying to find out why for 3 years. Outside, the range went briefly quiet between stages. Someone's radio crackled on the table. In the corner, a forgotten coffee mug had grown cold. Ward was still watching Maya with that careful attention. He saved people, Maya said. It wasn't a question. He saved 17 people, Hale said. During a field operation that went wrong in ways that weren't his fault, and he did something that should have been impossible at the range it happened at, and he got 17 men home who shouldn't have made it. A pause. And then someone buried it. The words landed. Maya had known, had suspected for years, in the way you suspect things that your body understands before your mind admits them, that her father's silence had a shape, that the absence of recognition wasn't an accident or a bureaucratic oversight, that someone had made a choice. She had not let herself look at that suspicion directly until now. Who? She said. Hale's jaw set. That's what I've been trying to answer. He looked at her steadily. And that's why you being here, shooting that qualification, and doing what you did this morning. That matters to someone who has spent 22 years making sure nobody looks in the right direction. Ward moved, just slightly, a shift of her weight, a change in her attention. She was looking at the window. Chief? She said quietly. Hale turned. Through the range office window, across the parking area, a vehicle had appeared. Dark blue, government plates, unmarked. It had been parked at the far edge of the lot all morning. Maya had noticed it on arrival and filed it under routine, the kind of anonymous government vehicle that appeared at federal installations the way furniture appeared in offices. But now the driver's door was open, and the man standing beside it was looking directly at the range office. He was too far to read clearly through the window, but Maya could see enough. Senior officer's bearing, civilian clothes, the posture of someone who is accustomed to a room adjusting itself to his presence, rather than the reverse. Ward said, He's been there since Yeo 800. I know, Hale said. You know who he is? Hale looked at Maya, then back at the window. His name is Rains, he said. Colonel Victor Rains. Retired. A pause. He's the officer who signed the order that sealed your father's file. Maya looked at the man by the dark blue vehicle. He was still looking at the range office, not moving, just watching, the way a person watches who has decided they own the patience in any situation and simply need to wait for everyone else to run out of theirs. She had a sudden, clear understanding. He hadn't come to observe. He'd come to manage. And he had no idea yet how much she already knew. Nobody moved for a moment. The three of them stood in the range office looking through the window at Victor Rains, and Victor Rains stood by his vehicle looking back, and the distance between them felt like something that had been measured and calculated long before today. Then Hale said, Don't go outside. Maya was already turning away from the window. I wasn't going to. I mean it. Not yet. He wants a reaction. He wants to know how much you know and how you know it, And the way he gets that is by watching how you move when you see him. Hale moved to the side of the window, out of the direct sight line. Right now, he doesn't know what we have. That's the only advantage we've got, and I'd like to keep it for more than 5 minutes. What do we have? Maya asked. Pruitt's phone metadata, the scope with documented sabotage, your ammunition count discrepancy, Voss's statement about seeing Pruitt at your lane, the false oversight committee visit from a man who doesn't appear on any committee roster. Ward had been writing as Hale spoke, itemizing it. It's a chain. It's not complete, but it's a chain. It's circumstantial, Maya said. Most chains are, until they're not. Hale looked at Ward. Where's Pruitt now? Holding room, range safety office, east wing. Ward capped her pen. He asked for water twice. I think he's working up to something. Let him work. Hale looked back at Maya. Rain's being here in person. That's not planned. Planned would be staying invisible, letting his people handle it, maintaining distance. Him showing up means something went wrong from his perspective. The scope plan failed, Maya said. The scope plan failed, and then you went to evidence custody instead of exploding or complaining or doing something he could use. Hale's voice was measured, but she could hear the shape of something underneath it. Not admiration exactly, the more practical version of it. He came to assess damage, possibly to activate something else. The secondary option, Maya said, from Pruitt's text. Right. So what is it? Hale looked at her steadily. We don't know yet, which is the part that concerns me. Outside the window, Rains had gotten back into the vehicle. The door closed. The vehicle didn't move, just sat there, watching. The afternoon session of the competition was the advanced stage sequence, a separate scoring bracket from the morning qualification, designed to evaluate shooters under stress conditions rather than static precision. Moving targets, partial exposures, timed sequences requiring multiple engagements across different distances, the kind of shooting that required not just technique but decision-making and the ability to prioritize under load. Maya had 45 minutes before her lane was called. She used 20 of them sitting with Ward in the empty briefing room adjacent to the range office, going through what Ward had assembled. Ward had been at Redstone twice before under different circumstances. She had a facility for organizing information under pressure that reminded Maya of a good intelligence sergeant, someone who had learned that the difference between useful information and useless information was almost always the order in which you arranged it. Tell me about Rains, Maya said. Ward opened a folder. Physical folder, paper inside. The kind that existed because some people still didn't trust digital. Colonel Victor Rains retired '06. 31 years, mostly in Army Special Operations, the last 12 in program management and oversight roles. Retired 6 years ago. Currently listed as a senior advisor to a defense consulting group. She turned a page. On paper, he's exactly what that sounds like. Former officer, private sector, occasional government contract work. Off paper? Off paper. He's been involved in 4 separate program reviews in the past decade that each resulted in the quiet retirement or reassignment of senior officers who were asking uncomfortable questions about legacy operations. Never directly implicated in anything. Never charged with anything. But his name appears in the footnotes of 3 Inspector General complaints that were subsequently dropped. He's good at making problems disappear, Maya said. He's very good at it. Ward paused. The sealed file on your father, Thomas Callahan's operational record from the Redstone incident. The sealing order was standard bureaucratic language. Training accident, ongoing review, administrative closure. But the officer who countersigned it was a Colonel Rains, then an '05 on a program oversight assignment. Maya kept her face still. The incident your father was involved in, Ward said. Do you know anything about what actually happened? Fragments, Maya said. I was 11 when he came back from it. He wasn't injured. He was just different for a while. Quiet in a different way. She paused. He told me once that he'd made a shot that saved people and that he should have been proud of it, but couldn't quite get there. I didn't understand what that meant until I was older. Because he knew it was being buried. I think so. Ward was quiet for a moment. The incident was a live-fire training exercise that went wrong. Fast rope insertion, close-quarter work, and then a complication. A real-world security breach on the range perimeter. Armed individuals. It went from training to actual in about 90 seconds. She let that settle. Your father was the designated range safety observer, not an active shooter. He was there to watch, not to engage. Maya looked at her. He engaged anyway, Ward said, with a bolt-action rifle. From a distance that shouldn't have been possible under those conditions, in low light, with personnel moving in the impact area. She paused. 17 men came home. The after-action assessment attributed the outcome to a combination of factors. Your father's name appears nowhere in the official record. Because Rains took it out, Maya said. Because Rains took it out. Ward closed the folder. We don't know why yet. Could be that acknowledging what your father did required acknowledging the security breach, which required acknowledging that someone failed to secure the range perimeter, which required finding out how that happened. She paused. Or it could be something else. Something else being what? The armed individuals who breached the perimeter, Ward said. The investigation into who they were and how they got there was also sealed. Same order. Same signature. The briefing room was quiet. Maya thought about her father in the garage, in the cold, teaching her to read a front sight post, teaching her to feel the wind, teaching her that the machine would fail and she had to be the machine. He had never told her why it mattered so desperately. He had just taught her, with the focused urgency of a man who needed someone else to carry something he couldn't put down. She understood now what he'd been carrying, and why someone needed to make sure she never became someone who could say it out loud. The storm warning came over the range radio at 1340. Not a severe weather advisory. Nevada didn't do those the way the Midwest did. It was a desert storm advisory, which meant a fast-moving system had developed over the mountain range to the west and was tracking northeast with winds that the Weather Service was estimating at 30 to 45 miles per hour on the leading edge, with significant visibility reduction from airborne particulate. Dust storm. The Nevada kind that arrived without gradual warning and turned afternoon into something resembling dusk inside 20 minutes. Major Farwell called a brief hold on the afternoon session while he consulted with range safety on whether to delay, continue, or cancel. Maya was walking back from the briefing room toward the staging area when she heard it on someone's radio, and she stopped. She thought about the afternoon sequence, the moving targets, the timed engagements, the entire format designed around modern optics that required clear sightlines and stable atmospheric readings. In a dust storm, digital rangefinders would struggle. Scope glass would pick up particulate on the lens. Wind reading would become nearly impossible through mechanical instruments. The atmospheric data feeding the computerized ballistic calculators would be updated too slowly to track conditions that would be shifting every 30 seconds. She thought about her father's front sight post. She thought about reading mirage and wind flags, and the feeling of air on the side of her neck. She thought, a dust storm doesn't touch iron sights. She kept walking. Farwell decided to continue. It was a decision that surprised her. She'd half expected the cautious call. Suspend, reschedule, protect the equipment and the scores. But Farwell had been running precision shooting competitions for 16 years, and he had a specific philosophy about weather holds. You held for lightning. You held for floods. You held for conditions that created genuine safety hazards. Reduced visibility wasn't a safety hazard on a range with proper lane separation and flagging. It was a variable. This is a competition for people who operate in degraded conditions, he said over the range speaker. Adjust your equipment and proceed. The reaction in the staging area was not enthusiasm. Shooters were breaking out lens cloths and protective covers, checking battery life on weather meters, arguing with their spotters about how to recalibrate their dope for conditions that were changing faster than the calculators could track. Kowalski was on his phone with someone, voice tight, asking for an updated wind forecast that the Weather Service clearly could not provide with enough precision to be useful. Voss was doing something methodical with his scope, removing the ocular lens cover, cleaning it, replacing it, working through a pre-degraded conditions checklist with the focused attention of a man who is recalibrating rather than panicking. Maya opened her rifle case. Iron sights. Nothing to clean, nothing to calibrate, nothing to recalibrate. She ran her function check, worked the bolt, checked the extractor, felt the trigger brake, set the rifle back in position. Done. She looked up to find Voss watching her from across the staging area. He looked at her rifle, looked at the approaching wall of dust on the western horizon, visible now as a brown-orange line against the sky, looked back at her rifle. He didn't say anything. She didn't either. The first lane of the afternoon sequence, rotating through the advanced shooters in groups of 4, was called at 14:15. The storm's leading edge was already affecting conditions. Wind had picked up to around 20 miles per hour, gusting to 30, with fine dust reducing visibility to approximately 600 meters. The targets beyond 600 had been pulled by range safety. This was not an accommodation, it was a safety protocol, which meant the effective engagement distances had been cut, which meant the advantage of extreme range precision optics had been reduced, which meant the playing field had shifted, not leveled, but shifted. Maya's group was called at 15:02. Her group, herself, Kowalski, a Marine sergeant named Flores, and a Delta operator whose name she'd seen on the roster as Garrett. All 4 walked to their lanes in the growing wind, equipment held steady against gusts. Kowalski's spotter was walking beside him, talking low and fast about adjusted holds. Flores had his head down. Garrett moved quietly. Maya walked in silence. She read the flags. She felt the gust pattern. The leading edge was irregular, surging, then dropping, the kind of wind that punished anything relying on a single reading. She felt the air temperature dropping as the storm front closed in. She noted the direction of the dust suspension at ground level versus the behavior of the higher range flags, which told her there was a shear layer somewhere around 15 to 20 feet. The wind at ground level and the wind at target height were doing slightly different things. She cataloged all of it without a notebook, the way her father had taught her. Be the machine, Maya. She settled onto her mat. Lane 12 again, same position, different afternoon. The dust was settling a fine layer on everything. She could feel it on her lips, taste the mineral edge of Nevada desert particulate. She didn't mind. The range tone sounded. First target appeared at 250 meters, close by competition standards, but in reduced visibility, 250 meters looked like more. She pressed. The front sight found the target edge. The wind was pushing left at this gust. She gave it a half-blade hold into the wind, let the gust peak and begin to drop, pressed in the momentary lull. Hit. Second target, 400 meters, partial exposure around a berm prop. She caught a gust between its peaks. One shot. Hit. Third target, moving, lateral, 500 meters. The storm was messing with her depth perception the way it messed with everyone else's. But she had learned to read moving targets through something older than optics. The pattern of motion, the leading edge of the silhouette, the geometry of the lead required at estimated speed and range. She tracked. Let the math do itself. Pressed. Hit. On her left, Kowalski's rifle went quiet for a longer than usual pause. She heard his spotter say something clipped and frustrated. Heard Kowalski's exhale, not relaxed, the pressurized kind. He missed. She knew it before the spotter confirmed it. She'd shot enough stages to recognize the difference between the silence of a man settling and the silence of a man fighting. The fourth target appeared at 550 meters, almost invisible in the dust at this point. She could see the shape of it, but the edges were soft, the mirage and the suspended particles combining to make the silhouette look like something half erased. She adjusted her sight picture to the center mass, read the wind one more time off the pattern of the dust swirl at distance, gave it what she thought it needed, pressed. Hit. She heard Garrett 2 lanes over confirm a hit at the same distance. He was good. She'd known it from watching him in the morning. Quiet, efficient, no wasted motion. The kind of shooter who had been doing this so long it had absorbed into his default state. The fifth target appeared at 600 meters, maximum range in this visibility. She breathed. She didn't know Rains was on the range until she heard his voice. He hadn't come to the firing line. He was at the observation rail behind the staging area, an elevated platform with a railing meant for safety officers and range commanders, accessible without entering the active lanes. I was standing there with Major Farwell, and she heard his voice during the brief pause between Target 5 and Target 6 when the range went quiet. The competition integrity protocols are very clear, Douglas. His voice was the kind that had spent decades in rooms where it was always the loudest by default, not by volume, but by weight. Calm. Certain. The voice of someone who expected that what he said would simply become what was true. A shooter with unverified ammunition provenance cannot be scored in a sanctioned competition. The chain of custody issue is disqualifying. I'd hate for the whole event to be compromised because the review process wasn't followed. Farwell's response was too low to hear. I'm not pressuring anyone, Rain said. I'm describing the protocol. The protocol exists for a reason. Maya stayed on her mat. She didn't turn around. She kept her eyes downrange. She heard Ward's voice then, calm, precise, the voice of someone who had also spent decades in rooms where her voice had to be twice as certain to carry half the weight. The chain of custody issue was resolved at 1100 hours. The ammunition was logged into evidence with full documentation. The lot number has been verified against competition standards and confirmed compliant. A pause. I can get you the paperwork if you'd like, Colonel. A silence. Not the comfortable kind. I wasn't aware the investigation had been formally closed, Rain said. It hasn't been formally opened, Ward said, which means there's nothing to close. What we have is a routine evidence log addressing a reported irregularity. The irregularity didn't hold up. Another pause. The shooter's scores stand. Maya heard Farwell say something that sounded like agreement. She heard Rains go quiet. Target 6 appeared. She pressed. Hit, Wang. The afternoon sequence ran for 90 minutes in deteriorating conditions. By the time the final group completed their last stage, the storm was fully present. Not catastrophic, nothing that threatened structures or created genuine danger, but present enough that the range looked different, felt different, operated differently than it had that morning. Visibility was down to roughly 400 meters of clean sightline, with the longer distances swimming in particulate. The electronic scoreboards on the range had been switched to manual confirmation because the electronic sensors at the target frames were giving inconsistent readings in the dust interference. Maya's scores had been manually confirmed by 2 spotters for every stage. She'd made sure of it, not loudly, not by demanding it, but by catching each spotter's eye after each hit confirmation and holding the contact long enough that they knew she knew they'd confirmed it and that they'd be asked to sign something later. She filed her final score sheet at 1548, and then she went looking for Rains. Ward found her before she found him. Don't, Ward said, appearing at her elbow near the east corridor of the range building. I'm not going to do anything. You're walking like someone who's going to do something. Maya stopped, looked at her. He's trying to erase my scores. He tried. It didn't work. Ward kept her voice even. Right now we have him as a man who showed up unannounced at a competition where his name appears in the evidence chain and attempted to influence the scoring outcome. That's something we can use. If you go over there and confront him, he gets to be a man who was confronted by an agitated entrant. Maya breathed through her nose. I know, Ward said, but we're not at the confrontation stage yet. When do we get there? When Pruitt talks. Maya looked down the corridor. Rains was visible at the far end, near the exterior door, talking to a man she didn't recognize. The man was younger, compact, with the kind of posture that didn't come from the military but came from somewhere else. Private security, possibly, or one of the more physical consulting roles that existed in the space between government work and the private sector. Rains was handing him something, envelope-sized. The man took it, glanced once around the corridor, and went outside. What was that? Maya said. Ward was already photographing it on a small device that wasn't quite a phone. Smaller, more specific. I don't know yet. He just handed something to a man I've never seen. I know. That man is going somewhere. I know. Ward lowered the device. I've got eyes outside. Give me 10 minutes. Maya stood in the corridor and waited, which was one of the hardest things she had done all day. And the day had included shooting 12 stages at 1,200 meters with iron sights in a competition designed to humiliate her. Patience was a skill. Like any skill, it had taken years to build, and it was still uncomfortable. She waited. Wub. Hale came for her at 1612. Not Ward. Hale, which meant something had shifted. He didn't say anything in the corridor. He just looked at her and moved his chin toward the east wing, and she followed him down the corridor and through a door she hadn't been through before, into the range's administrative section, a space of actual offices rather than tactical rooms, the kind of institutional space that accumulated paper and bad coffee and the specific exhaustion of people who ran logistics. The holding room was at the end. Hale opened the door. Pruitt was sitting at the table. He'd been given water, as requested, and he'd consumed most of it. He looked like a man who had made the calculation Ward had predicted he would make, and who had made and who had made it a direction that cost him something. His hands were flat on the table, eyes up when they entered. Hale sat down across from him. Maya stayed by the door. "Staff Sergeant Pruitt," Hale said. "You wanted to say something." Pruitt looked at his hands. "I wanted on record that I didn't know what the end goal was. I was told it was about invalidating a competition result. I thought—" He stopped. "I thought it was a contract dispute. Someone wanted to make sure a specific score didn't count for a procurement evaluation." "Who told you that?" Hale asked. "Hayden." Pruitt's jaw moved. "Richard Hayden. He approached me 3 weeks ago. He said he represented a private client who had a financial interest in the competition outcome. Prize money, contract evaluation, something like that. He paid me $2,000 to stage the scope and to facilitate access to the kit bag." He paused. "I didn't touch the kit bag myself. I provided access. Someone else went in." "Who?" "I don't know his name. Hayden brought him." Hale was quiet for a moment. "Pruitt, the man who briefed you, Hayden. He told you this was about a procurement contract." "Yes." "Do you believe that now?" Pruitt looked up, something in his face that wasn't quite guilt but was adjacent to it. The expression of a man who had been willing not to ask questions until the questions became impossible to avoid. "No," he said quietly. "I don't think I believed it then either. I needed it to be small enough that I could do it." The room was quiet. Maya looked at Pruitt and felt, without wanting to, that she understood exactly what he was describing. Not sympathy. She wouldn't give him that today, maybe not ever. But recognition. The specific human mechanism of making something smaller than it was, so you could fit it through the door of what you were willing to do. She'd seen it in enough people to know it wasn't unique to bad ones. "The man Raines met in this corridor," she said, "about 20 minutes ago. Did you recognize him?" Pruitt looked at her for the first time since she'd entered. "I didn't see that." "He was compact, mid-30s, dark jacket." Pruitt's face changed. It was very small, a tightening around the eyes, a fractional shift of his jaw. "That sounds like the man Hayden brought, the one who went into the kit bag." Hale was already on his radio, low and fast. "Ward, the individual from the corridor 20 minutes ago. Priority locate. He may be back on the range." Ward's response crackled back. "He went to the vehicle lot. Dark blue Suburban, government plates, east section. Vehicle is still there." "Still there," Hale repeated. "Where's Raines?" "Range building, north corridor. He's been on his phone for 15 minutes. Hale stood up. He looked at Maya. "Stay here." "No," she said. He stopped. "Whatever the secondary option is," she said, "it involves my rifle or my kit or my person. I'm not sitting in a room while someone executes it." Hale looked at her for a moment. The deliberation was visible, but brief. "Stay behind me," he said. "What?" They moved through the range building quickly, not running, but the fast walk of people with a destination and a reason. Ward met them in the north corridor, phone in hand, and fell in beside Hale without breaking stride. "Raines finished his call 4 minutes ago," Ward said. "He walked to the equipment storage bay, east side." "What's in equipment storage?" "Lane maintenance gear, cleaning supplies, and the afternoon scoring documentation before it goes to the records office." Maya said, "He's going after the paperwork." "Or creating a reason to be there," Hale said. "Either way." The equipment storage bay was a large room off the east corridor, accessed by a key-coded door that any range officer with a current access code could open. The door was ajar when they reached it. Not dramatically open, just slightly, the way a door sits when someone came through it recently and didn't pull it fully shut behind them. Hale pushed it open. Raines was inside. He was standing near a filing shelf, not touching anything, or no longer touching anything. He was standing with his hands at his sides, and the posture was perfect, the posture of a man who had been a colonel for a long time and knew how to occupy space in an authoritative way, even when he'd just been caught somewhere he had no documented reason to be. He looked at them. Then he looked at Maya. And something passed across his face that she hadn't expected. Not guilt. Not calculation. Recognition. The involuntary kind, the split-second kind, before the managed version came back down over it like a screen. He knew who she was. Not because she was a name on a competition roster, because he recognized something in her face. "Chief Hale," he said. His voice was exactly as she'd heard it at the observation rail. Measured, weighted, accustomed to the room adjusting itself. Sergeant Major Ward. Colonel Rains, Hale said. I'm going to need to know what you're doing in equipment storage. I'm looking for the range commander, Rains said. Someone told me he was back here. Major Farwell is in the operations center, Ward said. He's been there since 1530. Well, Rains spread his hands slightly. Simple miscommunication. Is it? Hale said. The room held the tension of people who had all stopped pretending but had not yet begun saying the actual things. Then Maya stepped forward. She wasn't behind Hale anymore. She was in the room, 4 feet from Rains, close enough to see the lines in his face and the specific quality of his stillness. The stillness of a man who was managing something, containing something, keeping something from moving. You know my father, she said. Not a question. Rains looked at her. I'm not sure what you mean. You recognized me just now, before you controlled it. She held his gaze. You've seen photographs. Or you saw him here 22 years ago, and I look enough like him that it registered before you could stop it. A pause. Thomas Callahan, she said. You signed the order that removed his name from the operational record. You sealed the file. And now you're here, in this room, on the day that his daughter shot a 12-stage qualification at Redstone with iron sights, and produced a score that's going into the official record whether you want it there or not. Rains said nothing. The score is evidence, Maya said. Not by itself. One competition doesn't prove anything, but it opens the question of who I am and where I learned to shoot and who taught me. And that question leads to a man whose name you spent 22 years making sure nobody said out loud. She paused. You should have left me alone, Colonel. If you'd let me compete and lose, nobody would have looked twice. But you came here. You sent people to sabotage my lane. You tried to have my scores invalidated. You put your name in the middle of it. She kept her voice even, not cold, not heated. The voice of someone stating facts to someone who already knows them. You made yourself part of this. The room was very quiet. Rains looked at her for a long time, and something shifted in him. Not a break. He was too controlled for that. Too many decades of managing rooms and outcomes. But a shift. The kind that happened when a man realized the position he thought he was managing from was no longer the position he was actually in. Your father, he said finally, made choices in a situation that he didn't have the full picture of. The consequences of acknowledging what he did would have... He stopped. Would have what? Hale said. Rains looked at Hale, then back at Maya. Would have required acknowledging what went wrong before it, he said. And why? The perimeter breach, Maya said. The word was barely out of her mouth before she saw it. The confirmation she needed, not from what Rains said, but from what his face did in the half-second before he controlled it. The perimeter breach was the thing, not her father's shot. The breach itself. Something had gone wrong with that range's security 22 years ago, and someone had known it was going to go wrong, and that someone was connected to a name that Rains had been protecting ever since. Who ordered the range unsecured? Hale said. His voice was very quiet. Rains said nothing. Who gave the order? Hale said again. The room held still around them like the eye of something. Outside, the storm wind pressed against the building's metal walls, a sound like the whole desert leaning in to listen. Rains looked at Maya one more time, and what was in his face now was not what she expected from a man who had spent 22 years winning. It was something older and more exhausted than winning. It was the look of a man who had been carrying something that had been too heavy for a long time, and who was only now, in this moment, beginning to calculate whether the thing he'd been protecting was still worth the weight of it. He didn't answer, but he didn't leave. And that was the first crack. The silence in the equipment storage bay lasted long enough that the storm outside became audible again. The metal walls ticking under wind pressure, a loose fitting somewhere rattling in an irregular rhythm. Rains hadn't moved, neither had Maya. Hale was the one who broke it, not with words, but with action. He turned to Ward and said quietly, "Get Farwell, now. And I need that recording running." Ward was already moving, hand at her hip where a small digital recorder had been since they'd entered the room. She'd activated it before they came through the door. Maya had noticed. She hadn't said anything. Ward went out. The door didn't fully close behind her. Rains watched it, then looked back at Hale. Something in his calculation had shifted. The absence of Ward changed the geometry of the room, and not in a way that favored him. 3 people was a confrontation. 2 was a witness. "You're recording this," he said. "Ward activated a recorder when we entered," Hale said. "It's still running. She took it with her, so technically no. There's no recording in this room at this moment." He paused. "That's your window if you want one." It was an odd thing to offer. Maya almost said so. Then she understood. Hale was giving Rains the shape of a choice, and the choice itself was informative, because a man who'd done nothing wrong would have reacted differently to it. Rains looked at the window. The one in the wall, not the metaphorical one. The storm outside had turned the afternoon light a particular color, yellow-brown, the color of desert air that had been rearranged. "I was a program oversight officer," he said, 22 years ago. The range here at Redstone was running a joint training sequence, Army, Navy, some contractor elements. It was a complex operation, multiple moving parts. Someone on the contractor side made a decision about perimeter management that wasn't cleared through proper channels. "What kind of decision?" Maya said. Rains looked at her. "They reduced the outer perimeter security to allow for a vehicle access window, equipment delivery. It was supposed to be a 30-minute gap in a non-critical sector." He stopped. The gap was used. "By who?" Hale said. "By people connected to the contractor who arranged it." Rains's voice was controlled, careful, each word placed like something that could be taken back if necessary. "I didn't know until after. By the time I understood what had happened, what the breach actually represented, the incident was already being written up as a training accident." "And you let it be," Maya said. "I made a decision." He said it without inflection. "The contractor involved had government connections that went well above my pay grade. Exposing the breach meant exposing those connections. In 2003, with everything else that was happening," he stopped. "You buried it," Hale said. "I managed it," Rains said, and the distinction he clearly heard between those two things was not a distinction Maya was prepared to extend him. "Your father's name was removed because acknowledging his role meant acknowledging the breach in granular detail. What he did, where he was positioned, the exact geometry of the engagement. It was a roadmap to the perimeter gap. I couldn't acknowledge one without exposing the other." The room held that for a moment. "So you protected a contractor," Maya said, "and erased my father." "I protected an operation," Rains said, "and I have spent 22 years. He stopped himself. Whatever was behind that sentence was too personal or too complicated to commit to in this room with these people, and he'd caught himself before he said it. "22 years what?" Hale said. Rains said nothing. Maya looked at him, really looked, the way she looked at a target, which was to say without the overlay of what she wanted to see. He was 63, maybe 64. The posture that had filled rooms for decades was still there, but it was holding something up now rather than projecting naturally. She had assumed, coming into this building, that the man who had buried her father's name was a calculation, a cold, bureaucratic machine that processed people as variables. He wasn't that. I was worse and more comprehensible than that. He was a man who had made a decision that he'd told himself was necessary, and then spent 2 decades living in a building he'd constructed out of that decision, and now the building had a crack in it, and he was standing inside it listening to the walls. That didn't make her feel anything gentle toward him, but it told her something about how to proceed. "The contractor," she said. "Who was it?" Rains looked at the floor, then back up. "That's not something I'm going to say in this room." "Why?" "Because what I say in this room goes into a recorder that Ward is carrying and eventually into a formal process where I have no control over how it's used. And the people I'd be naming are—" He paused. "They're still operational." "Still operational," Hale repeated. "The consulting group, the structure." Rains spread one hand slightly. "It evolved. It didn't disappear." Hale was quiet for a moment. "Is that why you came here? Not just to manage Maya's scores, but because her name appearing at Redstone, in this context, in this competition, was going to open questions that led somewhere you couldn't predict." Rains said nothing, which was its own answer. "The procurement evaluation," Maya said. "The story Hayden told Pruitt, that this was about a contract result. There's a real contract evaluation connected to this competition, isn't there?" Rains's jaw moved. "The winning score here goes into a marksmanship program recommendation," Maya said. She'd read the competition packet 3 weeks ago, including the footnoted language about program assessment. A training program procurement, and whoever wins, or whoever's methodology wins, has a case for a contract. She looked at him. The contractor who arranged the perimeter breach 22 years ago. They're bidding on that contract. Rains looked at her for a long moment. You have your father's instincts, he said. I have his training, she said. The instincts are mine. Farwell arrived 7 minutes later with Ward and a man Maya didn't recognize who was introduced as Colonel Richard Ashby, the range commander, a title she hadn't connected to a face until now because Ashby had apparently been at Redstone for less than a month, a recent assignment, and had spent most of today in the operations center dealing with the storm advisory logistics. He was younger than she expected for the rank, early 50s, a ranger tab on his shoulder, the kind of lean that came from decades of fieldwork rather than deliberate gym time. He looked at Rains the way a man looks at something that has appeared in a place he didn't authorize. Victor, he said. Richard, Rains said. They knew each other. Maya filed that. Someone want to tell me what's happening in my equipment bay? Ashby said. Hale told him. Concisely, in the organized sequence of a man who'd been building toward a briefing. The scope, the armory access, Pruitt, the kit bag, the ammunition, Hayden, the corridor exchange, the scoring interference attempt, Rains at the observation rail, Rains in this room. Ashby listened without interrupting. His expression didn't perform surprise, which meant he was either exceptionally controlled or had already suspected some of it. Rains, Ashby said when Hale finished. Are you here officially? I have no official role today, Rains said. Then what role do you have? Rains said nothing. Victor. Ashby's voice changed slightly. Not harder, more tired. I've been at this installation for 26 days. In those 26 days, I have found 3 things that don't make sense, and all 3 of them have your fingerprints on them from 20 years ago. He paused. I accepted this assignment because someone asked me to look at those 3 things and find out what connected them. I didn't know until 2 weeks ago that the connection had a name. He looked at Rains steadily. I know now. The room was very still. The file is going to be unsealed, Ashby said. That's already in process. It was in process before Captain Callahan arrived here. Her being here, he glanced at Maya. That's either coincidence or it's something she can answer for herself. I received an invitation, Maya said, mailed to my reserve unit address. I assumed it was routine. I didn't know about the file. Who sent the invitation? Ashby asked. Hale said, I did. Everyone looked at him. He let the silence hold for exactly as long as it needed to before continuing. I've been trying to unseal that file for 3 years through proper channels. Every request stalled. I needed something that moved the needle from a different direction. He paused. I knew Thomas Callahan's record. I found his daughter through the reserve marksmanship roster when her qualification scores came up on a routine review. I sent the invitation under standard competition protocol. He looked at Maya. I should have told you more before you arrived. That's on me. Maya looked at him. She felt the shape of several things at once. The understanding that she had been, to some degree, placed here deliberately. The fact that the competition was real and her invitation was legitimate, even if the full context hadn't been shared. And the particular human irritation of being a piece in someone else's strategy, even a strategy pointed in a direction she'd have chosen herself. You used me, she said. I gave you an opportunity, Hale said. What you did with it was entirely yours. She held his gaze for a moment. The distinction was real and also incomplete, and she would have the conversation about which was which at a time that wasn't this. Fine, she said. Ashby was watching the exchange with the expression of a man recalibrating several things simultaneously. Rains, he said. The contractor, the consulting group. I need the name. Rains was quiet. Victor. Ashby stepped closer. Not threateningly, but specifically. I have 3 unsolved inconsistencies in this installation's operational history. I have a sealed file that shouldn't be sealed. I have physical evidence of active interference in a sanctioned competition. And I have you standing in my equipment bay. A pause. I can build a case from those pieces without your help, and that case points in your direction. Or you can tell me the name and we build the case together and it points somewhere else. He paused. Those are your actual options. Rains looked at Ashby for a long time. Then he looked at Maya once more. There was something in it. Not apology, he hadn't arrived at that, but acknowledgement. The look of a man who recognized, finally, what the cost of a decision made 22 years ago had been, and who was now being asked to settle it. Caldwell Group, he said. The contractor was Caldwell Security Solutions, operating then under a different name, rebranded in 2008. They've held continuous government advisory contracts since 2001. He paused. The man who authorized the perimeter modification was Gerald Caldwell himself. He was a GS-15 on a DoD advisory panel at the time. He's been a private citizen for 12 years, but his firm is embedded in 6 active DoD contracts, including the marksmanship program evaluation connected to this competition. The room absorbed that. There's a paper trail, Rain said. I have it. I've had it for 22 years, and I've spent 22 years not using it, and... He stopped. The word that should have come next didn't. Ward said it for him, quietly. And you're done not using it. Rain said nothing, but he nodded. The next 4 hours were controlled chaos. Ashby put the range on administrative hold. The competition's final scheduled sessions were suspended pending what the official communication called a facility security review, language bureaucratic enough to forestall questions while being accurate enough to survive scrutiny. Farwell managed the competitors with the practiced steadiness of a man who had seen enough unexpected events at shooting ranges to have a protocol for the unexpected, which was essentially be direct, be brief, give them something to do while you figure out what's actually happening. Most of the shooters accepted it. A few didn't. Voss found Maya in the north corridor at 1800, where she was sitting on a bench with her rifle case across her knees waiting for clearance to leave the building. He sat down next to her without asking, which she decided to allow. Administrative hold, he said. On a facility that's run 1,000 events without an administrative hold. Yep, Maya said. Does it have anything to do with Lane 12? Everything has something to do with Lane 12 today. He was quiet for a moment. Pruitt's being escorted off the installation. I watched it from the observation window. 2 MPs. I know. So it's not a facility security review. No, she said. It's not. Voss rested his elbows on his knees. He had the posture of a man who was reconfiguring something internally and doing it without much outward evidence. She'd watched him shoot today, in the storm, in reduced visibility, and he was genuinely excellent. The 3 consecutive wins weren't political. He was the real thing. I said some things this morning, he said. Yes. The museum piece comment. I remember. I was being... He stopped. You were being what everyone here was being, she said. Don't over-apologize for it. It becomes its own thing. He looked sideways at her. You're not exactly easy to read. Good. Another pause. Your scores are going into the record. I know. The afternoon stages, too. I checked with Farwell before the hold, all confirmed. He was quiet for a moment. Your combined score puts you 3rd overall. Garrett's 1st. I'm 2nd. Maya had not known that. She hadn't asked. She thought about it for a moment. 3rd, behind a Delta operator who was one of the best shooters she'd seen today, and Voss himself, who was 3-time defending champion, with a 1984 Remington and iron sights, in a dust storm. 3rd is fine, she said. Voss almost smiled. 3rd is fine. He shook his head slightly. Okay. What did you expect, 1st? I don't know what I expected from you anymore. She picked up her rifle case. I'm going to get some water. You want anything? He looked surprised by the offer. Coffee, if there is any. There's always coffee at range facilities. It just tastes like the facility. I'll take it. She went to find it. The formal debrief happened at 20:30 in the main operations center, a room that had the clean functionality of a space designed to manage information rather than people, which made it slightly uncomfortable for the people currently filling it. Ashby at the head of the table, Hale and Ward on his left, Farwell on his right. 2 officers Maya didn't recognize who had arrived in the unmarked vehicles in the last 2 hours. She read their bearing and concluded federal investigative authority of some kind, not military. The specific quality of people who had authority that existed adjacent to the chain of command rather than within it. Rains was at the table. Not in custody, not yet. He'd cooperated enough to occupy the ambiguous space between witness and subject, and nobody in the room wanted to collapse that ambiguity before they'd extracted everything it could yield. Maya was there because Ashby had asked her to be. She sat against the wall rather than at the table, which was where she was comfortable. Position of observation, clear sight lines to the door and the room. The debrief was methodical. Hale ran it. Ward documented it. The two federal officers asked questions at intervals that told Maya they already knew certain things and were verifying rather than discovering. The picture that assembled itself was this. The Caldwell Group had held a continuous relationship with government marksmanship procurement going back to 2001. The current bid, for a program that would influence how the military trained and assessed long-range precision shooters for the next decade, was worth, over the contract life, something in the neighborhood of $400 million. The Redstone competition's outcome fed into an evaluation matrix that included demonstrated performance metrics. A score by a shooter using traditional iron sight methodology, at the distances Maya had demonstrated, would create a performance benchmark that undermined the justification for the specific optics and ballistic systems the Caldwell Group was contracting to supply. Not eliminate it, but complicate it. They weren't trying to stop the iron sight methodology from winning, Ward said, laying it out. They were trying to stop it from being documented. A third-place score by a reserve captain with a 40-year-old rifle goes into the evaluation record. It raises questions about whether $8,000 scope systems actually outperform trained traditional marksmanship enough to justify the procurement cost. It's a footnote that becomes a problem, one of the federal officers said. It's a question that costs them contracts, Hale said. And her father, Ashby said. He was looking at the table. Thomas Callahan. Thomas Callahan produced a performance in 2003 at this installation that would have raised the same questions about the same contractor's predecessor systems, Hale said. If his record had been acknowledged, it would have established a documented benchmark for unassisted marksmanship at extreme range that the optics industry couldn't explain away. Someone in the Caldwell predecessor organization recognized that and arranged for it to disappear. He paused. Rains was the mechanism. But the directive came from Caldwell. Rains sat with his hands flat on the table and said nothing. 22 years, Farwell said. I wasn't directing it at anyone in particular. He was just saying it to the room. For a procurement contract. Nobody answered that. Maya looked at Rains. He was looking at his hands. She had thought, coming into tonight, that she wanted him to be a monster. It would have been cleaner. What he actually was. A man who had made a manageable decision that had compounded for 22 years into something that had shaped the life of a family he'd never met, was harder to hold. Not forgiving. Not even close. But harder. My father knew, she said. Everyone looked at her. Not the specifics, but he knew his record had been interfered with. He knew his name wasn't in the after action. He spent the rest of his life teaching me to shoot the way he shot, and I used to think it was because he wanted to pass something on. She paused. I think now he was making sure someone carried the proof. That at some point, someone with his training and his name would show up somewhere it couldn't be ignored. The room was quiet. He died 4 years ago, she said. He didn't get to see it. She said it without performance, just the fact of it, in the room with the people who needed to hear it. Rains looked up from his hands. He knew what he did mattered, Rains said. He said it quietly, and it was the first thing he'd said in over an hour that didn't have management layered over it. He called me once, 11 years after. He didn't yell. He didn't threaten. He just said, I know what you did, and I know why, and I want you to know that I'm not going to carry it quietly for the rest of my life without making sure someone after me can carry it louder. Maya looked at him. I didn't know what he meant, Rains said, until today. The room held that. Then Ward said, practically, which was how Ward handled rooms that had become too full of weight. We need the Caldwell documentation. You said you have it. I have it, Rains said. It's in a physical location I can access, not here. When can you get it? Tomorrow morning. He paused. I'd like to make a call tonight to a lawyer first. That's your right, Ashby said. We're not going to stop you. Rains nodded slowly. He pushed back his chair, and one of the federal officers moved with him, not restraining, accompanying, the distinction that still existed and wouldn't for much longer. The room began to empty out by increments. Farwell left. Ward was still writing. Ashby sat at the head of the table for a moment after most of them had gone, looking at nothing in particular. Captain Callahan, he said. Maya stopped at the door. Your scores are certified. Your qualification is in the record. Third overall. He paused. That score is going to go somewhere. It'll be read by people who are looking for exactly that kind of data point. Good, she said. It's going to complicate the Caldwell evaluation. Good, she said again. He looked at her for a moment. How are you doing? She thought about it honestly for a second, which was more than the question usually deserved. Her shoulders ached from the prone position. She was tired in a way that went below physical. She'd found out things today about her father that she had spent years circling without landing on, and landing on them felt like less of a relief than she'd expected, and more of a settling. The specific weight of a thing that had finally found its correct place. Ask me in a week, she said. He nodded, like that was a reasonable answer. She thought it was. She found Hale in this parking lot at 2140. The storm had cleared out. These Nevada systems moved through fast, left the air scrubbed and cold, the stars unfamiliarly bright after a day of suspended dust. The dark blue Suburban was gone. The government vehicles were still there, along with the modest presence of people doing quiet work in lit windows inside the building. Hale was standing by his truck, looking at his phone, doing nothing in particular with it. The invitation, Maya said. He put the phone in his pocket. Yeah. You should have told me why. I know. He didn't defend it. I thought if I told you the full context, you'd come here loaded with it. I needed you to come here as a shooter. He paused. I was wrong to make that choice for you. I'm telling you now rather than waiting for you to demand it. She leaned against the truck next to him, not beside him. She needed to see his face, so she positioned herself at an angle. The file, she said, when it's unsealed. It'll happen. Raines's documentation will accelerate it. Ashby has the process moving already. He paused. Your father's name goes back into the record. Full operational credit. The 17 men he saved, there are still survivors. Some of them have been trying to say something for 20 years without the documentation to back it up. He looked at her. They'll have it now. Maya looked at the sky. The stars were the particular brilliant mess they only got when you were far enough from anything to see them properly. He would have hated the ceremony of it, she said. Most people who deserve ceremonies do. He just wanted it to have mattered, she paused. He would have wanted it to have mattered to someone who was still there to use it. Hale said nothing for a moment. The evaluation matrix for the Caldwell bid, he said. Your scores, your methodology, it's going into that record. The procurement reviewers are going to see a reserve captain with a legacy rifle, and iron sights outperform a field of elite shooters in degraded conditions. They're going to ask why that's possible. And when they ask that question, the answer is going to include your father's training record. And when his training record is unsealed, he stopped. It's not the ceremony, but it's the thing mattering. Maya looked at her rifle case, sitting in the back of the borrowed Jeep 10 feet away. 40-year-old leather, compressed foam, a rifle that had lived in a cold garage in her memory since she was 7. I'm keeping third, she said. What? The score. I'm keeping third. Garrett shot a better competition than me. So did Voss, technically. Third is accurate. She paused. I'm not interested in a result I didn't earn. Hale looked at her for a moment. Nobody said anything about changing your score. Good. She picked up the rifle case. I'm going to go find somewhere to get food that isn't this installation's cafeteria. You want to come? He considered it. The diner in Tonopah is open late. That's an hour and a half. It's worth an hour and a half. She looked at him. Is the food actually good, or are you one of those people who thinks remote diners have character? Both, he said. And the pie is legitimately good. She thought about it. Fine, she said. But I'm driving. She picked up her case, and Hale followed her to the Jeep, and behind them the lights of Redstone Tactical Range stayed on late into the Nevada night, full of people doing careful, methodical work that would take weeks to complete and years to fully matter. Maya drove. The rifle case sat in the passenger seat where it always sat, taking up exactly as much space as it needed to. The road back to the highway was dark and empty and very long, and for the first time all day, that felt like something she could use. The diner in Tonopah was called the Silver Strike, and it had been open since 1974, according to the hand-painted sign above the door, which looked like it had survived that entire span without being repainted. The interior smelled like coffee and griddle grease and the specific warmth of a place that didn't close between shifts. 3 other customers at this hour. A trucker at the counter working through a plate of eggs, two women in highway department vests sharing something that might have been pie. Maya and Hale took the booth farthest from the door. The waitress, 50s, no nonsense, the kind of tired that came from decades rather than today specifically, brought coffee without asking and menus without ceremony. Maya ordered the first thing that looked like protein. Hale ordered pie, which arrived with a scoop of vanilla ice cream listing to one side, already beginning to melt. They sat with the coffee for a while without talking. The trucker at the counter paid his bill and left. The highway women got a refill. "The 17 men," Maya said finally. "Do you know any of them?" "A few," Hale said. "By name, mostly. One of them reached out to me. That's how I found the file in the first place. His name is Darnell Webb. He was a specialist in 2003. He's been trying to get someone to listen for 15 years. He picked at the pie crust. He's in Reno now, works construction, has a daughter who just started college." A pause. "He told me that when it happened, when the situation turned real and your father made those shots, he didn't know who'd fired. He just knew the threat stopped and people around him were still alive. He found out months later, through the informal network, the way enlisted guys always find out things their chain of command buries. He tried to say something and was told there was nothing to say because the record showed nothing to say." Maya wrapped her hands around the coffee mug. "He's going to get a call soon," Hale said. "About the file." "About the file. About Rains. About the whole shape of it." He paused. "I thought you should know he exists. That your father's actions had a specific person attached to them who's been carrying the knowledge that he owes his life to someone he can't officially thank." Maya looked at the table. She was thinking about her father in the last year of his life, the particular quality of his quiet then, different from the operational quiet she'd grown up with. Slower, more careful. He'd been sick for 2 years before he died, and in those 2 years he'd taught her 3 things she hadn't known he still had left to teach. And she had wondered at the time where they'd been hiding, whether he'd been saving them. She thought now that maybe he'd been waiting, not for himself, for her. "He would want to know about Webb," she said. "I know," Hale said. "I'm sorry he doesn't get to." She picked up her coffee. It was strong and slightly bitter and exactly what she needed. "Tell Webb," she said. "Tell him whatever you need to tell him. Don't make him wait anymore." Hale nodded. They ate. The pie was, in fact, legitimately good. She had some of it. The drive back to Las Vegas was long, and the desert at night was the specific dark of places with no ambient light, and the Jeep heater ran warm on the left side and cold on the right, and somewhere around mile marker 40. She stopped thinking about Rains and Redstone and her father's sealed file and let the road be just the road for a while. Well, 3 weeks passed. She was at her unit's reserve facility in Sacramento. A Tuesday drill, the routine kind, armory inventory and PT, and the particular administrative texture of 1 weekend a month that always expanded to fill more than a weekend, when her phone buzzed with a number she didn't recognize. She let it go to voicemail, checked it after PT. The message was from a captain in the Army's Judge Advocate General Corps, brief and formal, requesting a call at her earliest convenience regarding an ongoing administrative review. She called back from the parking lot, still in her PT gear, sitting on the hood of her car in the October noon sun. The JAG captain's name was Flores, not the Marine sergeant from the range, a different one, and she spoke with the efficient warmth of someone who delivered both good and difficult news for a living and had learned that the most honest version of either was usually the most useful. "The review of Master Sergeant Thomas Callahan's operational record has been completed," she said. "The administrative seal has been lifted. The record has been amended to reflect full operational credit for the engagement at Redstone Tactical Range on September 14, 2003. Maya sat very still on the hood of her car. His classification has been updated retroactively. The after-action report has been amended to include his name and role. A pause. Additionally, the Inspector General's office has initiated a formal inquiry into the conduct of the program oversight process that resulted in the original seal. That process is separate from the administrative correction and will proceed on its own timeline. "I understand," Maya said. "Captain Callahan, there's one more item. The amendment to your father's record qualifies his action for formal commendation review. That process is also being initiated. It will take time, these reviews always do, but it's in motion. She paused again, and the pause had a different quality. I wanted to tell you myself because I've read the amended file, and I wanted you to know that what your father did, the record of it, the actual documented record, without redaction, it's remarkable. I don't say that in a professional capacity, She stopped. I thought you should hear it from someone who read it. Maya said, "Thank you." She meant it in more directions than she could immediately identify. She sat on the hood of the car for a while after hanging up. The Sacramento noon was different from Nevada noon, softer, less stark, with the Central Valley's particular quality of light that reminded her of afternoons in her father's garage when the light came in at an angle through the single window and turned the disassembled rifle into something almost luminous. She didn't cry. She wasn't sure what she was waiting for emotionally, but she sat with it and let it be what it was, and after a while it settled into something she could carry without bracing against it. She went back inside and finished the armory inventory. Darnell Webb called her 2 days later. She'd given Hale her number to pass along. She'd half expected not to hear anything. Some things, when they finally came to resolution after 15 years, didn't translate into phone calls. They just settled quietly, and people moved on. But Webb called on a Thursday evening when she was in her apartment making dinner, and she answered on the second ring. His voice was lower than she expected, deliberate, the kind of voice that had learned to carry things carefully. "Captain Callahan," he said, "this is Darnell Webb. I don't know if Chief Hale told you." "He told me," she said. "I'm glad you called." A pause. "I've been trying to figure out what to say for 3 days. I had this whole speech. It was a small, self-conscious sound. It was too long." "You don't need a speech," she said. "No, but I need to say something." He paused again. "I have a daughter. She's 19. Started at UC Davis this fall, studying environmental science. She wants to work on water conservation in the Central Valley. His voice did something, controlled itself. "She wouldn't exist if I hadn't come home. And I came home because of a shot your father made from a position nobody should have been able to make it from, in conditions nobody planned for, that stopped a situation from going to the worst place it was heading." He stopped. "I never got to tell him that. And I've been carrying that for a long time." Maya turned off the burner, sat down at the kitchen table. "He knew it mattered," she said. "I think he always knew. He just couldn't hear it from the people who owed him the acknowledgement." "Does it help?" Webb asked. "Hearing it from me?" She thought about it honestly. "Yeah," she said. "It does." "Good." A pause. "Your scores at Redstone, I heard about them, through Hale. 3rd overall. With iron sights?" She could hear the shape of a smile in it. "He taught you right." "He taught me everything." "No," Webb said. "He taught you everything he knew. What you did with it is yours." A pause. "That's what he would say. I never met him, but that's what he would say." She thought about her father in the garage, the cold, the disassembled rifle. His voice saying, "Be the machine with the specific urgency of a man giving someone something they would need." "Yeah," she said. "That's what he would say." They talked for 40 minutes. It wasn't what she expected. Not heavy, not the gravity of a formal acknowledgement. Webb was funny in the dry way of people who had survived things by finding the absurd edge in them. His daughter had called him the previous weekend to complain about a difficult professor, and he'd spent 10 minutes describing the call with the specific delight of a man who couldn't believe he got to have that problem. By the time they hung up, she felt something she hadn't expected to feel at the end of this particular week. Lighter. Not resolved. There was still the Caldwell investigation, still the commendation process, still the slow machinery of institutional correction grinding through its stages. But lighter. The specific lightness of a weight that had been redistributed rather than removed, carried now by more people than just her. The Caldwell Group's bid on the marksmanship program contract was formally withdrawn in December. Maya heard about it from Ward, who sent a 2-sentence text message on a Wednesday morning. Caldwell withdrew. Procurement review is reopened. And then a 3rd sentence, a few minutes later. Your scores are in the evaluation record. They're going to be read. She was in a coffee shop when she got the message. She read it, put her phone down, picked up her coffee, and thought about all the ways a thing could matter that didn't look like a ceremony. The formal inquiry into Richard Hayden took longer. He disappeared between the evening of the Redstone events and the following morning. The dark blue Suburban was found abandoned at a truck stop outside Fallon, Nevada, keys in the ignition. He surfaced 6 weeks later through a federal process that Maya wasn't privy to the details of and didn't ask about, because the details weren't hers to manage, and the outcome was the investigator's problem. Pruitt accepted a plea arrangement and was separated from the Army. He lost his pension. He'd made a practical calculation, and the calculation had been wrong, and the specific weight of that was visible in the single photograph Maya saw of him leaving the proceedings. A man who looked like he'd been carrying something that had finally gotten too heavy to hold, and had set it down, and found that the act of setting it down didn't feel like relief. Rains was the complicated one. He had provided the Caldwell documentation as promised. Physical files, 22 years old, preserved with the fastidiousness of a man who had known, at some level, that a day of accounting was always possible, and had prepared for it with the same thoroughness he'd applied to everything else. The files implicated Gerald Caldwell directly in the 2003 perimeter decision, with paper trails that included emails, a phone log, and 2 signed memos that should have been destroyed and weren't, because Rains had kept them. Why he'd kept them was a question she didn't have a clean answer to. Maybe he'd known from the beginning that he was building an exit. Maybe he'd just been unable to fully commit to the burial. Some people needed the thing they'd done to remain documented somewhere, even if only in a box they never opened. The federal inquiry gave him a modified cooperation status. It wasn't a walk. There were professional consequences: the consulting work, the advisory connections, the specific Washington-adjacent existence he'd built for himself. Those didn't survive the scrutiny. But he wasn't facing criminal charges, which was either justice appropriately calibrated or a familiar institutional protection depending on where you were standing. Maya thought about it once, sitting on the floor of her apartment with the rifle case open beside her, the rifle broken down into its components for cleaning. She thought about what it meant that a man who had erased her father's name would have a softer landing than her father had. She turned it over. She didn't arrive at peace with it. She arrived at something more practical. The thing she could control was in front of her, and the thing in front of her was worth maintaining. She cleaned the rifle the way her father had taught her. She put it back together. She checked the action. She set it in the case and closed the zipper, and the sound of it was exactly what it had always been. Well, the commendation review took 8 months, which was fast, by military bureaucratic standards, fast enough that Hale told her someone had made it a priority from inside the process. She didn't ask who. The machinery had people in it who had been waiting for exactly this kind of correction to make, and some things moved when they were finally allowed to move. She was notified by letter, which arrived on a Thursday in June, physical letter, printed on Army letterhead, the formal language of institutional acknowledgement. She read it standing in her kitchen in the early morning, still in the clothes she'd slept in, with coffee she'd just made going cold on the counter. Master Sergeant Thomas Callahan, posthumous. Meritorious Service Medal, with the operational citation restored in full. She read the citation. It was her father, described on paper for the first time by people who hadn't known him, assembling a picture from documentation and testimony and the arithmetic of what had survived. It was incomplete. Documents were always incomplete, but it was real, and it was official, and it contained his name in a place that would not be removed again. She read it twice. Then she put it on the kitchen table and went and got her coffee and stood at the window for a while, looking at the neighborhood she'd lived in for 4 years, the same view she'd seen 10,000 times, which looked exactly the same as it always had, and felt completely different. Her phone buzzed. "Hale, did you get it?" She typed back, "Yeah." A pause, then, "Good." Another pause, longer. Then, "He earned it." She looked at the letter on the table, the formal language and the printed letterhead, and the specific institutional weight of a thing that had been wrong for a long time being made right in the way institutions made things right, which was imperfect and late and real. "I know," she typed back. The award ceremony was in August at Fort Myer, the kind of venue reserved for formal military occasions with enough history in the walls to give weight to whatever happened inside them. Maya had been asked whether she wanted it public or private. She'd said private, and then Hale had told her that Webb wanted to come, and she'd said all right, and then Ward had said she'd like to be there, and Voss, which she hadn't expected, had sent a message through Hale saying simply, "If there's room." there was room. She wore her reserve dress uniform, which she hadn't worn in 2 years, and which required 15 minutes with an iron, and the discovery that one of the buttons had worked loose at some point and needed resewing. She resewed it the morning of the ceremony, sitting cross-legged on her bedroom floor with a needle and thread, which felt like the right way to do it. The rifle case went with her. She'd debated it. It was a ceremony, not a range, and the rifle didn't belong to the occasion in any formal sense. But her father had carried that rifle to Redstone in 2003, and she'd carried it back to Redstone 22 years later, and it felt wrong to leave it behind now. She set it at her feet during the ceremony. The presenter was a brigadier general whose name she'd seen on correspondence, but whose face she was putting to the name for the first time. He read the citation in full, all of it, the restored version, the geometry of the engagement, and the distance and the conditions and the outcome. 17 names saved by one man shooting from a position the record had pretended didn't exist. She received the medal on her father's behalf. It was smaller than she expected. They always were. She stood at attention while the general pinned it to a presentation board, and she kept her eyes level and her face controlled. And she thought about her father's hands on the bolt of this rifle, and his voice in that cold garage, and the front sight blade that she had looked through 10,000 times carrying everything he'd given her. She did not cry during the ceremony. She cried afterward, briefly, in the car, alone, with the medal in its case on the passenger seat and the rifle case in the back. She gave herself 3 minutes of it. The specific release of something that had been held for a very long time finally moving. And then she drove. Webb found her in the parking area after. He was with a young woman who had his eyes and the specific bearing of someone who had been told today that her grandfather's service record was being acknowledged in ways she hadn't known were necessary. Webb introduced her as Amara. She shook Maya's hand with both of hers, which was not something Maya expected, and which required her to reconfigure her composure quickly. "My dad told me about your father," Amara said. She was maybe 19, 20, the age where everything was still urgent. "He said I exist because of him." "Your dad made it home," Maya said. "That part's his." "He said you'd say something like that." Maya looked at Webb, who spread his hands with the expression of a man who had accurately predicted something and was mildly pleased about it. "He also said you'd have the rifle with you," Webb said, nodding at the case in her hand. "My father carried it here in 2003, she said. "I wasn't going to leave it in Sacramento." Webb nodded. Something in his face, not the smile exactly, but what lived behind it, said that this was exactly right, that the rifle being here was the part of the day that made sense to him in a way the formal ceremony maybe didn't. "Can I—" He stopped himself. "Is it all right if I see it?" She looked at him for a moment. Then she set the case on the hood of a nearby car and opened it. The rifle lay in its worn foam, iron sights, scratched stock, the accumulated mark of decades of use and care and everything her father had known about what the machine was and wasn't. Webb looked at it for a long time without touching it. "It looks exactly like what I thought it would look like," he said quietly. She closed the case. He didn't say anything else, and she didn't either, and between them, that was enough. Voss caught her on the way out. She'd been aware of him at the edges of the ceremony. He'd come in dress whites, which she hadn't expected, the full formal thing, which said something about how he'd categorized this occasion internally. "I have something to say," he said. "All right." He looked like a man who had rehearsed this and was now finding the rehearsal inadequate. "What I said on the first morning, about the museum piece." Voss. "Let me finish." He paused. "I've been shooting competitively for 12 years. I've shot against the best people in the country. I've never seen what I saw at Redstone." He stopped. "Not the score. The shooting. The way you— I've never seen someone work like that. Like the conditions weren't conditions. Like they were just information." He paused. "Your father taught you that?" "He did." "So what I said about the museum piece, I wasn't just wrong about your rifle. I was wrong about what I was looking at. And I wanted to say that out loud, specifically, rather than just not mentioning it and hoping it disappeared." She looked at him. "The afternoon light was good out here. Honest, desert-adjacent light that showed things as they were." "Thank you," she said. "That took something." "Nah." He almost smiled. "Not that much." "A little." "A little," he admitted. She picked up the rifle case. "You shot a good competition at Redstone. In the storm, the afternoon stages. You were good." "You beat me in the storm stages." Barely. No, he said. Not barely. He said it without resentment, with the simple accuracy of someone who had looked at the numbers. Your afternoon score was better than mine. Garrett beat us both. You were second in the afternoon, not third. She looked at him. That's not what the score sheet showed. The score sheet showed third overall combining morning and afternoon. But your storm stage score was better. He paused. I looked at it. I wanted to know. He met her eyes. You should know that. She thought about what that number meant. Not to the competition, which was done, but to the evaluation record, which was not second in the storm stages, in reduced visibility, in a dust event, with iron sights against a field of the best optics available. Does Ashby know? She said. I sent him the breakdown. He acknowledged it. Voss paused. It's going into the evaluation record, separately noted. She looked at him for a moment. This man who had called her rifle a museum piece at 0700 and had stood at attention in dress whites at her father's commendation ceremony 8 months later, and who had gone through a competition's worth of data to find a number that favored her and made sure it was documented. People weren't what you thought they were at 0700. She already knew that, but it was still worth noticing. You want to shoot again sometime? She said. Informal. No committee. He raised an eyebrow. Against that rifle? I'll spot for you if you spot for me. He thought about it. Yeah, he said. I'd like that. She drove back to Sacramento that evening. The drive was 5.5 hours, which gave her time she didn't fill with music or podcasts or anything except the road and the dark, and the occasional light of an oncoming car stretching across the asphalt ahead. The rifle case was in the passenger seat. She thought about the garage, the cold and the light from the single window, and her father's hands moving across the disassembled rifle with the certainty of a man who understood the thing he was handling completely. She thought about the way he'd looked at her when she finally broke a mile-distant target for the first time, at 17, in a field behind their house. Not proud exactly, that word was too small, but as though something he'd been carrying toward a destination had arrived. She thought about Darnell Webb's daughter studying water conservation at UC Davis, who had a life because her father came home, who had no idea that a chain of decisions made by a man with a bolt-action rifle in 2003 was somewhere upstream of her existence. She thought about chains, the ones that constrained and the ones that connected, the ones you carried and the ones you passed forward. Her father had built a chain from himself to her. Not the rifle, not the technique, though those were part of it. The chain was the insistence that skill was real and worth maintaining and worth passing on, that the thing you could do with your hands and your eyes and your attention was yours in a way that no institution could permanently remove, even when it tried. He'd been right. The exit for Sacramento came up in the dark, the usual exit, the same one she took home from every drive. She took it, and the city came up around her the way cities did at night. Lights collecting in the distance and then surrounding you until you were inside them without quite knowing when it happened. She pulled into her parking space at 11:40, sat in the Jeep for a moment. The metal in its case was in the back seat. The rifle was beside her. Outside, the apartment complex was quiet, the particular quiet of late Tuesday night when everyone had given in to the fact of Wednesday. She picked up the rifle case. She brought it inside and set it in its place, the specific corner of the bedroom it had occupied since she'd moved into this apartment, the place she'd designated for it because it needed a place that was permanent and considered rather than wherever happened to be convenient. She opened the case and looked at the rifle for a moment the way she sometimes did, not to check it, but to see it. The front sight post, the worn stock, the rear aperture that had been her window onto every target she'd ever engaged, her father's hands, her hands now. The distance between those two facts was the whole story. She closed the case. She was tired in the good way, the way that came from something being finished rather than just interrupted. She'd slept badly for 8 months, the particular broken sleep of waiting, and she thought tonight might be different. She brushed her teeth, changed her clothes, lay down in the dark. Through the bedroom window, the Sacramento sky was its usual orange-gray, the city's ambient light reflecting off the cloud cover, the specific nighttime color of places where people lived densely. She'd fallen asleep looking at that sky 10,000 times. She thought about one more thing before she went under. Her father had never won a ceremony. He'd never held the medal, never heard the citation read, never stood in the building while the words moved through the air with his name attached to them. He'd spent 22 years knowing he'd done something real that the record said hadn't happened, and he'd chosen to respond to that not by fighting the record, he'd tried that and failed, but by teaching, by handing the proof forward to someone who wasn't yet born into it, but would grow into it if he was careful enough. He'd been careful enough. The thing he'd carried alone, she now carried with Webb and Hale and Ward and Voss in his dress whites, and a JAG captain named Flores who had read the amended file and called to say it was remarkable. She carried it with 17 men and their families, and a girl at UC Davis who wanted to work on water conservation and didn't know she was downstream of a shot made in a Nevada desert before she was born. That wasn't carrying. That was how a thing became part of the world and stayed there. Maya closed her eyes. Outside, the city breathed its ordinary breath. The rifle case stood in its corner in the dark, occupying exactly the space it needed to, holding exactly what it had always held. Some things don't need to announce themselves to last. They just need one person willing to carry them far enough that someone else